Fuji just announced that they're releasing the new Fuji X mount camera in May of this year. I'm pretty excited to know what it is, but it was a great time for me to start reflecting and looking back on my time and how I went from Canon over here to Fuji, what I think of the Fuji system, and what I'm looking forward to a little bit in the future. So that's what this video is all about. First, I'd really like to know why you are with Fuji, or what intrigues you about the Fuji system. Throw your response in the comments below. All right, so why am I with Fuji? Let's start 10 years ago when the Fuji X Pro 1 was released, the first in the X mount lineup that carries over, that started the tradition to get us to where we're at today. At the time of the X Pro 1 release, I was with Canon, and I was with Canon because that's my first camera brand I started with. I started with the Elan 7 film camera that I learned photography and taught photography with for quite a while. I saw the X Pro 1 in magazines, and I was like, that thing looks cool. And a friend of mine got one, and I used it a little bit, and I was like, this is really, really a beautiful camera. I thought it was pretty amazing. But I had tens of thousands of dollars built into my Canon system. My wife and I at the time were professional photographers shooting weddings and portraits. So we were doing a ton of them, and we were fully invested in the Canon system. So 1 series cameras, bunches of L lenses, sometimes the same copy, for one for me, one for my wife, of an L lens. And we just had so much invested, I honestly wasn't even imagining that I would ever switch brands. I thought I'd be with Canon forever. And even though my friend loved his X Pro 1, he also wasn't shooting weddings. He was shooting landscapes or just like stuff he found, like found object photography. And the X Pro 1 was fine for a lot of types of photography, even like street photography. You had to work with it a little bit. But I didn't think that it could handle a wedding, so I didn't even consider it. That mindset, that idea that I wasn't going to shift from away from Canon, changed a little bit. I started to evolve a little bit. The Canon stuff was becoming heavy, right? I'm getting older, and I never thought I'd get a little bit older. And carrying around the 1D level cameras with multiple lenses in my backpack, on my hip, 2 cameras on me, was breaking me down. I thought I was a strong young dude, but that stuff was heavy, and it was really getting to me. So the X series was starting to look more tantalizing. My buddy got the XT1, and when I started using that, I was like, wow, this thing focuses better than the X Pro 1, and the image quality was absolutely fantastic. I was really enjoying what I was seeing with that. And so I ended up buying the XT1. I still kept all my Canon gear, but for a while I was kind of a hybrid shooter. I was shooting anything professionally, I would shoot with the Canon stuff. And then for fun, I would end up grabbing the XT1. The more I used the XT1, the tactile dials, just the feel of the camera, the image quality was great. I just used it more and more for my personal life and for going out and taking fun photographs when I wanted to just enjoy photography. And that whole concept, that whole arrangement changed a little bit with the XT3. Suddenly the XT3 was a much faster camera. When I used the XT3 and the 50-140, I was getting fantastic results. I was getting reliable results, and I shot a couple weddings, lots of portrait sessions, and I realized that finally I was close to the Canon stuff as far as reliability and getting what I needed. Now, I wasn't a sports shooter, and I would have never made the switch if I was like a true sports shooter. But for weddings, for portraits, for that kind of stuff, I absolutely thought that the Fuji stuff was up to par, and that was it. I sold the rest of my Canon gear, all of it, and I invested fully into the Fuji system. Luckily, I got a pretty good chunk of money for the Canon stuff, and Fuji was a little bit cheaper, so I was able to make out pretty good. And I have a fully featured Fuji system that I use now for everything that I do. I do want to quickly talk about this last year in my job. I worked at a camera store for almost the entire year. And I found that using a lot of the other cameras was very intriguing. So I used everything from the Canon R5 and R6, the Nikon Z6 II, the Z7 II. I messed around with the Sony A1, A7 IV-R, A7 III, A7C. I even used the Canon R3 for a little bit, that brand new thing with the iFocus, which is just crazy. And I was really at times tempted. I would get these amazing cameras, like the Z7 II with the massive amount of megapixels. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's pretty cool. The autofocus systems on the other ones. There were times when I took some of those cameras home and I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. Should I switch? But that feeling would quickly dissolve as soon as I grabbed another Fuji camera. Even the X100V has a heart and soul that just doesn't seem to exist in a lot of those other cameras. You know, one of the most tempting times for me was using the A7C from Sony. It's a full frame, really small body, really good battery life, amazing image quality, great lens lineup. It really intrigued me. I thought about, that was the biggest, that was the camera where I really considered changing. But there was something kind of missing out of it. The heart and soul of Fuji is what really makes it happen for me. The feeling of the dials, the screens, the lenses are just incredible. You know, those Fujicrons, the little f2s are just awesome. And using all those other cameras just really solidified that I have the right camera system for me right now. The right camera system for you could be anything. The camera system doesn't make the photographer, right? There's got to be kind of a mind meld between the two. The camera has to be able to do the job that the photographer wants to do with it. And for me, Fuji does that. For me right now, photography is more about joy and pleasure and making really high quality like landscapes and nature images than anything else. And I think that Fuji is the right place for me. And Fuji in 2022 can do anything that I want it to do. So I could actually take an image like this one, a flower, and make it the size of a wall. The Fuji quality is outstanding, and when I make sure that I spend some time with the file, I could really get a lot out of the pixels, even though they're only 26 megapixels. Every portrait, every wedding session I do right now, every wedding that I do, the Fuji X-T4, the Fuji X Pro 3 nails the shots that I need every single time. In bad weather and good weather, it just does what I need it to do. So the question for me is, in 2022, will I buy the new camera from Fuji? And I want to say no, but I'll say probably not right away. I probably will eventually upgrade eventually, right? So Fuji probably needs to do two major things to make me consider upgrading and to entice other people who are using other cameras to come over to Fuji. And that's number one is probably the autofocus system. They need to make their autofocus system better. I think the autofocus system is pretty good for what I use it for. I have no problems with it right now. I do know that when I use a lot of those other cameras and I would go out and take pictures of birds or eagles or fast moving wildlife, I was getting much more reliable focus without even really knowing the systems that well than I was with the Fuji stuff, knowing the system really well. And I think that if they can improve that, if they can increase confidence in the cameras, a wildlife photographer would probably love this X system. These small cameras being able to take in places would be really cool. So the other aspect that I hope they improve is the amount of megapixels without increasing the noise too much. I think 26 megapixels is fine for the most part, but I do work on some projects for myself and for some others where I need to blow up the pictures pretty big. Fuji files do fine, like I showed you that example before, but more megapixels gives me more of a little bit of a margin of error, allows me to crop in a little bit more, and allows me a little bit more confidence that I'm going to get a bigger print at a higher quality. So if Fuji did those two things and really kind of hit a home run, knocking those out of the park, man, I'd be thinking about upgrading, and I think a lot of other photographers would be more intrigued with the Fuji system because those are the two things when I talk to photographers that keeps them away from Fuji cameras. We are living in a magical time. All of our cameras can do things that we never thought possible 10 or 15 years ago, not even close. These cameras are incredible. I'm excited for Fuji, but I'm also excited to see all the other cool cameras coming out. It's an awesome time. Let's just try to make sure that we're out being creative, not worrying too much about the camera, even though I am a gear junkie. I love this stuff. Let's just go out, take great images, share them, and enjoy photography together.